The vast, iridescent skies of Zelith Prime shimmered with twin moons casting an eerie glow over the temple gardens. Glistening petals exuded a faint bioluminescence, their soft pulsing light painting the marble pathways in a kaleidoscope of colors. It was a world both stunning and unforgiving, where rigid traditions ruled the lives of its inhabitants, especially those of noble blood, and Princess Kalara was no exception. She had always known her duty. From the moment of her birth, she was groomed for leadership, taught the sacred ways of her people, and bound by customs that had lasted for millennia. The most sacred of them all, the preservation of purity. Zelithian law was clear. No outsider was permitted to see a royal unclothed. To do so was to claim them irrevocably and irreversibly as a mate. And if the claim was not honored, death awaited both parties, which made what had just happened all the more catastrophic. Princess Kalara stood frozen in place, wrapped hastily in a silken robe. Her violet skin still damp from the ceremonial bath. Her long silver hair clung to her shoulders, the steam from the temple spring still curling in the air. And before her, eyes wide with horror, stood the human, Commander Ethan Voss, a soldier from the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, stationed on Zelith Prime as a diplomatic escort. He had stumbled into the private bathing chambers in what could only be described as the worst timed accident in history. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Kalara's voice sliced through the thick tension like a blade. "You have seen me," she whispered, her luminous golden eyes locking onto his. "And now, you are bound to me." Ethan took an instinctive step back, hands raised. "Wait, hold on. This isn't what it looks like. Did you see me unclothed?" She interrupted, her tone sharper now, demanding an answer. Ethan's jaw tightened. He was no fool. His years in the military had trained him to read situations quickly, and from the way Kalara's entire body was rigid with tension, from the way her delicate fingers curled around the silk of her robe with a death grip, he knew this was bad, very bad. He hesitated. A noise outside the chamber made them both stiffen. Voices, heavy footsteps, guards. Kalara's golden eyes flashed with something close to panic. "Answer me now, human," she hissed. Ethan exhaled, his mind racing for a way out. "Wes." But it was an accident. The moment the words left his mouth, the tension in the room shifted, like the weight of an unspoken fate settling over them both. Kalara's face paled. "Then you are my husband," she whispered, "or you will be dead before sunrise." The doors burst open. The Zelithian royal guards flooded into the chamber, their ceremonial armor reflecting the temple's ambient glow. Their elongated spears pulsed with energy, the weapons shifting as they took in the scene. Their eyes flicked from Kalara, half-dressed and standing dangerously close to a human, to Ethan, who looked entirely out of place in this sacred space. The head guard, a towering figure with a crest of deep blue, narrowed his eyes. "Princess," he said carefully, his tone respectful but laced with suspicion. "Explain." Kalara lifted her chin, a regal mask slipping into place despite the turmoil in her eyes. "There is nothing to explain. The human has seen me." Her voice was steady, commanding. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled warriors. One of them hissed something in the Zelithian tongue. Curse if Ethan had to guess. The head guard's expression hardened. "Then he has violated our sacred law." Ethan bristled. "Look, I don't know what rulebook you guys are reading from, but this was an accident." The guard's grip tightened on his spear. "Accident or not, human, the law is absolute. No outsider may see our royal lineage in such a state without accepting the bond." "If I don't?" Ethan asked. Though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer, Kalara met his gaze with solemn finality. "Then they will execute you." Ethan swore under his breath. He had faced battlefields, survived ambushes, and endured grueling military campaigns. But this, marrying an alien princess to avoid execution, that was a first. "Then the choice is yours," Kalara said softly. "Will you claim what you have seen? Or will you meet your end by my people's hand?" Ethan exhaled through his nose, his mind racing through the possible ways out of this. He could fight. No, that was suicide. He could run, again pointless. Or he could play along, at least long enough to find a way out of this mess. "Fine," he said finally, rolling his shoulders. "I'll do it." A murmur spread through the guards, but Kalara simply nodded. "Then the rite will be performed at once." The head guard hesitated before bowing slightly. "As the princess commands." Ethan didn't like the sound of that. "What rite?" he asked wearily. Kalara turned to face him fully, the soft light of the temple casting shadows across her delicate features. "The bonding ceremony," she said. "It must be done immediately. Before the high priests, before my people, so that all may witness the union and know it is sealed by the gods." Ethan stared at her. "You mean a wedding? Right now?" "Wes," she said. "Or you die." Ethan let out a humorless chuckle, running a hand through his hair. "Great, just great." The head guard stepped forward. "The preparations will be made at once." Kalara's eyes softened just for a moment. "This is the only way." "Ethan," he sighed. "Yeah, I figured." As the guards ushered them both toward the ceremonial hall, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken the sharpest, most unexpected turn in the history of bad luck, married to an alien princess. And the worst part, he wasn't even sure if he minded. The ceremonial chamber of the Xelithian palace was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Massive crystalline spires rose from the ground, refracting light into swirling colors that danced along the walls. The air was thick with the scent of incense, an intoxicating blend of exotic flowers and something faintly metallic. At the center of the vast chamber stood an altar, carved from obsidian and inlaid with vines of luminous gold. And standing before it, dressed in ceremonial white, was Kalara. Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to center himself. This wasn't the first time he'd been in a high-stakes situation, but it was definitely the first time he'd been forced into an alien wedding ceremony to avoid execution. He still couldn't believe how fast everything had happened. One moment, he'd been trying to explain that stumbling into Kalara's private chambers had been a mistake. The next, he was being led through a grand procession, watched by an entire court of alien nobles, some whispering, others openly glaring at him. "This is madness," he muttered under his breath. Beside him, one of the palace guards nudged him forward. "Silence, human. The rite begins." Ethan clenched his jaw but said nothing. Kalara, on the other hand, stood as if carved from marble, her golden eyes unwavering as she faced the high priest. Despite the outward calm, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled ever so slightly at her sides. She didn't want this either. That realization made it slightly easier to swallow. The high priest, draped in heavy blue and silver robes, lifted an ancient staff and struck it against the stone floor. The sound echoed throughout the chamber, silencing the murmurs of the assembled nobility. Before the sacred moons of Xelith Prime, under the watchful gaze of our ancestors, we gather to witness the binding of Princess Kalara and the Terran known as Ethan Voss. Ethan tried not to flinch at the weight of all those eyes on him. "The human has seen what was forbidden," the priest continued. "And by our ancient law, he must either accept the bond or be sacrificed to restore the sanctity of the royal line." A few voices in the crowd muttered darkly at that, as if disappointed they weren't getting to see an execution instead. Ethan scowled but held his tongue. Kalara stepped forward, then, her voice clear and steady. "The human accepts the bond," she declared. The high priest nodded sullenly. "Then let the vows be spoken." Kalara turned to face Ethan directly. In that moment, with the entire weight of her people watching, something in her expression shifted. This wasn't just a forced ritual for her. This was her life. And for all the strength she projected, he saw the cracks in her carefully constructed mask. She was afraid, not of him, but of what this meant, of what would come next. Ethan exhaled and made a decision. If he was going to do this, he wasn't going to do it half-heartedly. He straightened his shoulders, meeting her gaze head-on. "Princess?" he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Let's do this properly." Something flickered in her expression, surprise maybe, then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. The priest stepped forward again, extending a small ceremonial blade made of a translucent blue crystal. The binding must be sealed in blood. Even tense, but Kalara took the blade without hesitation. She turned her palm upward and, with a single precise motion, drew the blade across her skin. A thin line of violet blood welled up along the cut. Without hesitation, she extended the knife to Ethan. He stared at it for a long moment before accepting it. The blade was warm in his hand. 1,000 thoughts raced through his head about how insane this was, about how he was being swept into something far beyond his control. But beneath all of that, one thought stood out. She needed him to do this. So, with a deep breath, he mirrored her actions, dragging the blade across his own palm. Red human blood met violet Xelithian blood as they clasped hands. The priest's voice rang out. "By the bond of blood, by the will of the gods, and by the law of our ancestors, let it be known, this union is sealed." A deafening silence followed. Then, from the crowd, a single voice spoke. "This is an outrage." Ethan barely had time to register who had spoken before a figure stormed forward. Tall, armored, and radiating pure hostility, the man was clearly of noble blood. His pale blue skin bore the same markings as Kalara's, though his were sharper, more pronounced. Her brother. Kalara's entire posture stiffened. "Varric," she said, voice even. "How could you do this?" Varric's golden eyes blazed with fury. "A human, a filthy, primitive outsider. This is a disgrace, I'd rate. I get a brother-in-law, and he already hates me." Varric turned on him with a snarl. "You do not belong here, Terran. You defile our traditions, our people." Ethan met his glare evenly. "Not my fault your traditions include marrying people off to avoid execution." Varric's lips curled. "You will regret this, human." Before Ethan could respond, Kalara stepped between them. "Enough," she said firmly. "It is done." The Bondic's jaw clenched, but he did not challenge her. Instead, he turned to the high priest. The council will hear of this, he warned, and they will not accept it so easily. With that, he turned and stormed out of the chamber, the nobles parting for him like waves. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Well, that went well. Kalara shot him a sharp look. Do not underestimate my brother, she murmured. He is dangerous. Ethan tilted his head. So are you, princess? Something in her expression softened at that. Before she could reply, the high priest spoke once more. The bond is sealed. The human is now consort to the royal house. Murmurs rippled through the gathered nobility. Some voices carried quiet outrage, others quiet amusement. Ethan turned back to Kalara. So now what? She hesitated. Then, lowering her voice, she said, Now we survive. And somehow, Ethan knew she meant it quite literally. The palace was eerily quiet that night. The grand corridors, usually filled with the soft murmurs of attendants and the rhythmic footsteps of patrolling guards, felt almost abandoned. Ethan stood by the balcony of his new quarters, staring out over the cityscape of Xenoverse Prime. Towering spires of luminescent crystal stretched toward the sky, glowing faintly beneath the twin moons. The air was cool, crisp, and heavy with the scent of exotic flora. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his bandaged palm. It still stung from the ceremonial cut, married to an alien princess. A few weeks ago, he'd been running supply missions for the Terran Exploration Corps, skirting the edges of diplomatic space, trying to keep out of trouble. Now he was at the center of a royal scandal. Bound by blood to Kalara, a woman who barely tolerated him and whose people probably wanted him dead. Hell of a promotion, he muttered to himself. Behind him, the door slid open with a quiet hiss. You should not stand in the open. Kalara's voice was firm, but not unkind. There are many who would prefer you were removed. Ethan smirked, turning to face her. She stood in the doorway, still clad in the ceremonial attire from earlier. The flowing white robes contrasted starkly with her violet skin, the golden insignia of her house gleaming in the dim light. So, I'm a target now, he asked, crossing his arms. Kalara stepped inside, letting the door close behind her. You always were. But now they will be less subtle. Good to know. Ethan leaned against the railing. So what happens next? Do we just play house and hope nobody stabs me in my sleep? She exhaled through her nose, something that might have been amusement or frustration. The council will not accept this union without challenge. My brother will see to that. Ethan had no doubts about that. The look Varric had given him during the ceremony had been pure venom. And what does that mean for me? Kalara hesitated. It means you must prove yourself. But Ethan raised an eyebrow. Prove myself. How? She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. 4 laws dictate that an outsider who joins the royal bloodline must demonstrate strength, intelligence, and honor. They must pass the trials of aptence. Ethan blinked. Sounds fancy. What are these trials? Kalara's gaze was steady. They are dangerous. Of course they are, Gar. Only a select few have survived them. Greed. And if you fail, the bond will be declared void. Ethan tilted his head. So, you're saying there's a way out of this? Kalara's expression darkened. Do not mistake this for mercy. If the bond is voided, my people will demand retribution. Ethan frowned, which means they will execute you. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Ethan sighed. You know, for a wedding gift, this kinda sucks. Kalara's lips twitched, barely perceptible, but there. All right, princess, he said, pushing off the railing. Tell me about these trials. Kalara studied him for a long moment before nodding. The first trial begins at dawn. Dawn came too soon. Ethan stood in the center of the palace's grand training courtyard, surrounded by an audience of nobles, warriors, and high-ranking officials. The air was thick with anticipation. The murmurs of the gathered spectators aloha in the background. Kalara stood at the edge of the arena, her arms crossed, watching him closely. Varric, however, stood beside the high priest, a smirk on his lips. This will be over quickly, he said loud enough for Ethan to hear. Ethan ignored him. He had bigger problems. In front of him stood a Xelithian warrior, at least a head taller than him, clad in ornate battle armor. His name, Ethan had been told, was Commander Taveric, one of the most feared combatants in the Royal Guard. The first trial was a test of strength, and Ethan was about to get his ass kicked. Taveric cracked his knuckles, flexing his 4 muscular arms. You are weak, Terran, he said, his voice deep and guttural. You do not belong here. Yeah, I've heard that before, Ethan muttered. The high priest stepped forward, raising a ceremonial staff. The first trial begins now. Taveric moved like a force of nature. Ethan barely had time to react before the Xelithian lunged, swinging a massive fist at his head. He ducked, rolling to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow. Dust kicked up around him as he scrambled to his feet. The crowd jeered. Taveric smirked. You run like Pre. Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew he couldn't win in a straight-up brawl. But if there was one thing humans were good at, it was adapting. He dodged another strike, but this time stepping into Tverek's blind spot and delivering a sharp elbow to the ribs. It barely fazed the warrior. Tverek laughed. Pathetic. Ethan barely had time to move before a backhand sent him sprawling. Pain exploded across his jaw, his vision spinning. Kalara watched, her expression unreadable. Ethan groaned, pushing himself up. The Zealethians were strong, stronger than him, but they had a weak balance. Their larger bodies and extra limbs made them powerful, but it also made them top-heavy. Ethan wiped blood from his lip. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see how you handle this." Tverek charged again, but this time, Ethan didn't dodge. Instead, he ran straight toward him. The warrior hesitated, momentarily surprised, and that was all Ethan needed. At the last second, he dropped low, sweeping Tverek's legs out from under him. The massive alien stumbled, momentarily off balance. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the warrior's arm, twisting with all his strength. Tverek crashed to the ground hard. The crowd gasped. Tverek's smirk vanished. Ethan rolled to his feet, breathing hard. Tverek growled, shoving himself up, but it was too late. The high priest stepped forward. The human stands victorious. Silence. Then, murmurs. Kalara exhaled softly, relief flickering across her face for the briefest of moments. Tverek scowled. Tverek bared his teeth, but he did not challenge the ruling. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "One down," he muttered. "What's next?" Kalara stepped forward, voice quiet. "The next trial will be far worse." Ethan sighed. "Figures." The final trial took place at the heart of the sacred temple, deep within the mountains of Xenoverse Prime. The towering structure, carved from ancient black stone, loomed over Ethan as he stood at the entrance, Kalara beside him. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of burning incense and distant storm clouds. This was it, the last test. If he passed, he would be accepted into Zealethian society, his marriage to Kalara honored, his life spared. If he failed, well, they hadn't been shy about explaining what would happen. He adjusted the straps on his tunic, ignoring the bruises from the previous trials. "All right, princess, what's behind door number 3? Kalara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "The trial of honor," Ethan snorted. "Sounds simple enough." "It is not." "Of course not." She turned to him fully, her violet eyes serious. "This is not a test of strength or wit. It is a test of truth." He frowned. "Truth," she nodded. "You will be placed before the elders. They will look into your mind, your past. They will see your intentions, your fears. If they find deception—" She didn't finish, but she didn't have to. Ethan let out a slow breath. "So, basically, if I'm not good enough, they'll know yes." "Great." Kalara hesitated, then, for the first time, she reached for his hand. Her touch was cool, firm. "Ethan," she never used his name. "Not like that. If there is anything you wish to tell me now." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her. There were 1,000 things he could say. That he had never wanted to be here. That he had never imagined a life like this. That he had spent every moment of these trials trying to figure out how to survive, not necessarily how to win. But instead, he said the only thing that truly mattered: "I'm not going to fail." Kalara studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let us begin." The chamber was dark. Ethan knelt in the center of a massive stone circle, surrounded by robed figures, the elders of Xenoverse Prime, their golden eyes glowing in the dim light. The walls pulsed with energy, ancient runes flickering across the surface like living veins. Kalara stood at the edge watching. Tverek stood beside her, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. Ethan ignored him. The High Elder, an ancient Zealethian with deep violet skin and an air of authority, stepped forward. "Human," she intoned, her voice like rolling thunder. "Do you understand what is about to happen?" Ethan nodded. "I do." She raised a hand and the room trembled. "Then we shall begin." A wave of energy washed over him, cold and unrelenting. He gasped as images flickered through his mind, memories of his past, his childhood, his time in the Terran Corps. Every mistake, every triumph, laid bare for the elders to see. He clenched his fists, breathing through it. Then the memories shifted. He saw Kalara. The moment they met. The ceremony. The way she looked at him with a mixture of frustration and something else. Something she would never admit. And then the vision changed. A future. A battlefield, flames licking the sky. Kalara standing at his side, her blade drawn. Their hands clasped. Not out of duty. Ethan's breath hitched, the energy faded, the elders were silent. Then, the High Elder spoke. "This human is worthy." The room erupted. Some cheered. Others protested. Tverek's face twisted in fury, but Kalara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ethan sagged, exhaustion washing over him. Did I pass?" Kalara stepped forward, offering him her hand. "Wes," she said softly. "You did." He took her hand, letting her pull him up. For the first time, she didn't let go. The night after the trial, Ethan found himself standing on the palace balcony again, staring at the twin moons. The air was warm, the sounds of the city drifting up from below. Footsteps approached behind him. He didn't need to turn. Could have warned me about the mind-reading thing, you know. Kalara stepped beside him, her gaze distant. Would it have changed anything? He thought about it, then shookably not. A pause. Then quietly she said, "You are one of us now." Ethan glanced at her. "And you? Do you actually believe that?" She hesitated. Then, after a moment, she turned to him, her violet eyes catching the light. "I do." Ethan exhaled a laugh. "Well, that's something." Another pause. Then Kalara smirked. "You are still my husband, human." He groaned. "Yeah, I haven't forgotten." She tilted her head. "Perhaps in time, it will not seem so terrible." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. The way the moonlight caught the edges of her features, the way she stood closer than she had before. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was right.